Hello everyone, welcome to Food for Dogs. I have a game I want to talk about today, and that is World's End Club on the Nintendo Switch. It came out about 6 months ago, and I obviously got a physical copy because I was very excited about it. I played it when it arrived, and I had many people asking me my opinion, would I do a review, etc. I basically avoided the question of whether I'm going to cover it or not because I felt uncomfortable. You know that I really like to be positive about the games I play, and I always try to look at them with an eye for what kind of good work have the developers put in. Have they tried really hard? Is there a good story? Is there a theme to follow? Do the graphics look nice? It all, in the end balances into an overall picture, but I'm really, really hesitant to be negative about a game where clearly everybody put a lot of effort, a lot of work, and a lot of heart into it. And that's the reason why I shied away for so long talking about this game, because I feel really conflicted about it. I'm sort of torn between the things I like about it and the other aspects where I think it falls down. I finally got my courage up to do this. I will tell you just a little bit about the origin of the game because that is part of the problem. And then I will show you some footage I recorded of the game and explain where I see some flaws or faults, in particular focusing on the structure of the game. I know that sounds a bit boring. I mean, a structure is the sort of thing you probably got your English teacher in class going on about, saying analyze, etc. But structure is very important in games as well. Structure is like a bridge. Everybody and everything has to travel over it, and if it doesn't hold up well, then the plot, the character development, everything will be affected. But first of all, why was I so excited for this game initially? The reason is stated right on the back cover. It says, "Friends till the end. Friendships will be tested as mysteries unfold in the newest story from Kotaro Uchikoshi and Kazutaka Kodaka." Many of you will know those two names. Uchikoshi is famous amongst people who enjoy visual novels and puzzle games for the Zero Escape series, quite iconic by now. More recently, he did AI The Somnium Files, which is an excellent game. And Kodaka, of course, is known mainly as the creator of the Danganronpa series, another game series that's become really, really iconic. So the moment I heard that there was a new game coming out with those two creators involved, I got hugely excited. And then, and I hope this will be a bit of a warning lesson, not only for me, but for everybody else, I basically got caught up in the hype. And I didn't look more closely at the game. I simply ordered a copy. It was a given for me. Uchikoshi, Kodaka, tick. Whether the game would really be what I expected didn't occur to me to ask at the time, but it's something we should always bear in mind. It's very, very easy to get caught up in hype, we all know that. If we're then disappointed, well, that may be due in part to overhype, overexcitement, expectations that maybe couldn't be met by the game. That's the reason why I hesitated for so long, because I felt I might do the game an injustice. But enough time has passed by, enough water's flowed under that bridge, that I feel I can now talk about it with a bit of distance and better reflection. So World's End Club is described as a puzzle action adventure game developed by a new company called 2Cure Games, and they were founded by ex-employees of Spike Chunsoft. Formed in 2017 by Kodaka, the composer Masafumi Takada, an illustrator called Komatsuzaki, and also the Zero Escape director Kotaro Uchikoshi. So quite a profile there from the founders. I don't know whether this is their first game, but I think it is in the West. So this was developed by them and published by Izanagi Games. Now here comes the interesting part, and that was the bit I hadn't spotted when the game was first announced. It was initially released as part of the Apple Arcade offerings in September 2020. Now, I don't have any iOS equipment. I don't subscribe to Apple Arcade. I know nothing about it or what's on offer there. So that had completely bypassed me. I think if I had realized that, it might have rung a few warning bells and I would have looked at it more closely. I simply wasn't aware of it. The Apple Arcade release was described as early access, which I find just a wee bit odd. In fact, I need to point out that I was alerted to this backstory about the game by one of my subscribers. And that's one of the reasons why I love talking to you guys, because nobody can know everything, but there's always somebody who knows something interesting, broadens my horizon, gives me more background. The flow and interchange of information and opinions is just invaluable for me, really, as a content creator. So thank you very much. That was what I needed. It put me on the trail of finding out what had been going on with this game. Now, the one thing I don't know is whether they had always intended to release a full console game and bring out an early access version on mobile or Apple Arcade beforehand. Whether that had been the whole plan all along, I don't know. It still strikes me as a slightly odd procedure, especially if you consider that the game, as it was first presented on Apple Arcade, was not really finished. It had an ending of sorts, but it wasn't the full ending. Now, this is confusing for anybody buying or wanting to play a game on a service they subscribe to. I think they might have been shortchanging people by not telling them exactly what was going on. I found some information. I'll link the article and other information in the description below, so those of you who want to follow this can do so. World's End Club Apple Arcade version ends on Cliffhanger. Now, this was posted on Silicon Era. The World's End Club Apple Arcade version isn't entirely finished. Uchikoshi, the game's writer, took to Twitter to confirm that the mobile version isn't complete. Rather, it is about 10 hours, he said, and ends on a cliffhanger, as the Nintendo Switch version will be offering the complete story. So, as I mentioned before, that came out in 2020, and the full Switch version not until about half a year later this year. I think with an unclear scenario like that, what you're going to get is confusion. And when I, dived into the internet to find out a bit more. I saw lots of forums where people were asking questions constantly about, I finished the game on Apple Arcade, I think, but what's happening? Will there be some add-on, a sequel? People were just confused. I don't blame them. I think I would have been annoyed. So from my point of view, I think it hasn't been handled terribly well. As far as I'm aware, once the Switch version came out, the Apple Arcade version was also updated to include the continuation, the final stretch, with the what I will call the true ending. So from this back history, you can already see where there might be a problem and why I want to look at the structure in particular, because it is always difficult writing a story and then bolting on the final piece after quite some time. There are issues there, in my opinion. So before I dive into showing you some footage and taking you through some of the scenarios, I just want to show you the main characters who are shown on the inside cover here. Now, one thing we all love, of course, in games is the characters, not just what they're like, but also how they develop and maybe change throughout the game. And this was one area that I thought was just a bit thin. The most important characters, they do go through a transformation, you could say, and there are later on backstory and revelations about them. That is true. In particular, the silent protagonist, Rachel, and another character called Poppety, and the duo of Vanilla and Aniki. But apart from that, the description given in this excellent tiny little art book for each character is as detailed as you will get in the game, and I don't think there was much we learned further about many of the characters, beyond that they acquire a special skill which is pretty sort of regular in most games. So each character is basically defined by one character trait, like Mo-chan, a chubby little fella, is defined by his love for food and how he will always follow his nose. And little Chuko, who is the youngest character of all, I think she's under 10 years old, from what I remember, possibly only 8. She's basically defined by the problems she has with spicy foods, and that crops up again and again and again in the game. So some of the writing made me think, together with the illustration style, that this might be a game aimed more at the younger players, who often don't mind a joke being repeated many, many times, where we adults would say, okay, enough is enough, kids delight in that sort of thing. But I'm not sure. I honestly don't know what target demographic they had in mind, because the rating is 16 for the European version, and for the North American version it's teen, which is basically 13. I think 13 is probably strikes me as more realistic. So when I first ordered the game and got it, I was aware that that was the age rating, and I assumed therefore that it was aimed at basically an adult or young adult age group. But when you play the game, you could be forgiven for thinking that it's really aimed at a much younger age group. So there's nothing wrong with cross-spectrum as far as age is concerned. There are many games that appeal to both very young players and grown-ups equally. They're often fantastic games because that's a very, very difficult balance to achieve. But I'm not sure that they've managed that with this game. So that's just what I wanted to say by way of introduction. So you've got a bit of a context for why I think there were complications right from the start that then possibly tripped up the game down the line. So you ask, what am I saying? Am I saying the game is no good and it's not worth playing? No. That is definitely not the impression I want to convey. I think there are multiple issues with the game, and if those are something that would really be a factor for your decision, then I think you need to know. And I can't really hold back with any criticism if that's what I genuinely think. On the other hand, there are also many good things about the game. I'm glad I got it, and I enjoyed playing it. I had a few frustrating moments, and I will explain that in a moment. But overall, especially since I like following the work of these two creators, Uchikoshi and Kodaka, it certainly was a very interesting experience for me. But it was not the experience I had expected. I feel I've learned something there about not falling for hype, even if it is for game authors who I admire very deeply. It doesn't mean they're always going to do the type of game that I'm truly interested in or that I can connect with. We all have the same experience with authors we may love. These things happen. So let's dive into some gameplay and let me finally explain what I found once I started playing the game.
「風に帆を上げて頑張れ組言われるけどみんな一つになれば天下無敵だ」泣きたいこともあるけれど僕らがそばにいるよ
And it's welcome to World's End Club, which was originally slated to be called Death March Club. However, negative feedback made them change their mind on that. So I will take you through the stages of the game, and we start out with an opening tutorial just with the basic controls, quickly going into what looks like the final boss encounter, and as you can see, our little band of heroes succumbs. So we are in fact rewinding the story to the beginning to have another go. The next scene is a bit surprising. You can see from the scan lines that it is in fact a TV show. Interestingly enough, this one short scene was cited by the classification authorities as the reason why the game was rated for such a high age group, especially in Europe. If they had simply left out that scene, they wouldn't have had the problem with the age rating. Here you see Pippety for the very first time, a very strange creature. She is very important. We will encounter her again. Some of the themes of the game are becoming apparent, and I will be pointing out similarities to the previous work of Uchikoshi and Kodaka. The resemblance here is, of course, to Zero Escape and the Death Game. So next we finally see that we are in fact travelling in a school bus on a school trip. This is vanilla. And this is where the story itself starts. By the way, I just want to mention quickly that I am trying to avoid spoilers as far as possible. Obviously there will be a few minor ones, but I have taken great pains to cut out anything in the scenes that would give you a strong hint. So this is the disaster that starts off the adventure for our band of school children who, needless to say, need to save the world. And our protagonist, Rachel, finds himself in strange surroundings, wondering, of course, where am I? Where is everybody? So we know now that we are in an undersea theme park, underground. Many reviewers have focused in on this beginning scene in the game, and quite rightly, because I think it is possibly one of the strongest gameplay scenes in the game. I thought it was a strong opening to the game with good, simple but good puzzles and a very, very fast-paced action sequence. They need to escape, and you have a time limit to do so. It reminded me strongly of the Zero Escape series, and I was looking forward to more similar action to come. And suddenly Pippety appears, things heat up. There is a question mark over why they have the wristbands, again very reminiscent of Zero Escape. Pippety herself appears a little like a Monokuma type figure, so that's Danganronpa Kodaka's work. And then our school children are confronted with the stark reality of Sludgebot. To lose the game means being disposed of by Sludgebot. So this is getting quite serious and cruel, and obviously they need to escape. The prologue here is in fact the only chapter that features a true elimination game of fate. So the prologue, in a way, gives you almost the wrong impression of what kind of gameplay to expect. And if you manage to beat the time limit, you will make it outside and you will all arrive on top in the real world, the reality you are now facing. So once we arrive above ground, you will see something very interesting that immediately reminded me of another game developed and published by Spike Chunsoft, and that game was published in July 2018 in Japan and is called Zanki Zero, Last Beginning. And it features an island in ruins after the destruction of Earth, leaving behind 8 people as survivors. So a bit of a similar theme. And the reason why I was so strongly reminded of Zanki Zero is that huge X in the sky. I have a strong memory of that in Zanki Zero, and the X icon features very importantly in that game, just as it does here in World's End Club. So here you see the timeline, which clearly indicates which parts are story, that's more visual novel style, and which parts are act, that is the gameplay. And we'll now venture into one of those gameplay sequences so I can show you the mechanics. And here we are, back in a world that is unrecognizable for the children. They are trying to make their way back to Tokyo, which is a long way away, they've worked out. And they're split into basically two teams, taking different routes, trying to find a passable way to Tokyo. One team has the top line on the timeline and the other has the bottom line. Here they've split up into an even smaller group. They sometimes go just in twos to explore, and as you can see, major problem. The girl Pi has been kidnapped, rolled up like a sushi roll by a huge monster, a mother monster. In this situation, Mo-chan finally has to step up, to front up, overcome his fears, and turn into a hero with superpowers. Ooh, and there was Pi flying through the air.
お前に激突した衝撃で弾き飛ばそんなところでお前の体一緒に
So Mo-chan developed a special super ability, like Rachel before him, that happened much earlier at the aquarium. And over the course of the game, all the characters will have to unlock their own personal special ability, which the kids will need to overcome all the obstacles and to make it through to the final boss in the end. Here Mo-chan is demonstrating his new ability, Man of Steel, so we can see what it looks like in practice. It's pretty simple and straightforward. This particular skill works quite well with the control scheme, something I can't say necessarily for many of the other skills where the programming is not really ideal. So a bit of information you can access for the characters in the options menu. And the game tells you throughout exactly what to do, which button to press, which strategy might work. It's obviously aimed at players who are either younger or who may be inexperienced, more casual gamers, as you may well find on a mobile platform, maybe like Apple Arcade. And here we see Mo-chan successful, pushing away the enemy. He faces more, and there will be lots more, and it can get a bit repetitive. The powers don't have any upskilling. Basically, once you've got it, that's it. That's a basic ability and it doesn't go beyond that. So once again, a pretty straightforward scenario for people who maybe don't want a too complex or too challenging game. Here's Penelope. She appears throughout the game at various stages as a sort of a boss you have to defeat in between to be able to progress the story onward. She talks about a traitor here, and that is really the last trace of that element. Here we see Aniki unlocking his own special ability. And here is Tatsun, a very funny, endearing character, and unlocking his particular skill. Yes, the question of the traitor, which occurs in the prologue, doesn't really carry through to the main game. While it is there in the background, the focus for the children is really on cooperating, and that's the important theme. And here we see one of these collectibles spawning, little stickers you can collect. They don't give any particular bonus or anything, they're just there to be collected. And I'm just showing you this sequence to demonstrate the very light puzzle elements involved. There really isn't that much to it. They do get a bit more complex as you progress in the game, and that's some platforming to get the collectible. The main problem with the gameplay sections is really the controls. They can sometimes get very frustrating and annoying. And we'll see some of that in a moment as well. I managed to capture some of my not so fine moments. And this gives us a little scene which shows the bonding between the children. And a cell phone in 1995. Who needs a cell phone when you have a payphone just around the corner? Those were the days. This enemy looks too big and ugly, so you run. You don't have a choice, it is scripted. And we're on to another section. I just wanted to show you this particular little platforming run. The game always tells you now we can go forward after having solved that little puzzle with the ball and the rock. Now Mo-chan's ability will get them through this. And this enemy took a lot of bumping. I even cut some of it, it took so long. until he finally rolls into a ball that you can dispose of. So it can get repetitive and at times a little tedious. So there's time for another little bonding scene. And Mo-chan loves being tickled. So I think you can see that why I think that it's really aimed at a younger age group. Now here we see the timeline, and here we go from act to camping, and the campsite gives us an opportunity to talk to all the individual characters for a bit more information and insight. So it is a bit like a visual novel, except you don't really interact much, you just read and listen. And while it is nice and it's all very soothing and calming, I found the camp scenes on the whole to provide very little information of true interest. There was a lot of chit-chat, a lot of trivia. Okay, but after the first couple of camps I really had enough of that, and you could easily skip most of those dialogue scenes. There's the odd one that provides a little bit of insight, that's all. I'm just switching the voice language to English here just to show you what the English voices are like. I think both are good. And that's one of the strengths of this game, that it is fully voiced, which really brings the whole thing to life.
Anyway,
that, and of course the beautiful animation and the music, which provides the perfect background to every scene. I usually want to skip the dialogue. This was annoying because I had finished doing the dialogue. I wanted to close it and move on, not skip it. So from the camp we move on to the next story sequence.
I wonder if Kansai and the others heard our message.
Beats me. I couldn't care less about them.
Jeez, you sound like a robot with no emotion.
Here we are back in gameplay, which shows us briefly Kansai with his ability with the baseball bat. And here is another sticker spawning, a collectible. Yes, and sometimes they run in circles. As I said, the controls. Another sticker, and have a look at how tricky it is to collect that one. Now, here's a little bit about aiming, because you often have to aim at things, and goodness me, I won't comment any further. That's not just me being awful with the aiming controls, I assure you. I can only assume the touch controls on mobile must have been a lot better. And here comes my favourite enemy, the Yeti. For some reason I have a thing about this Yeti. I mean, he doesn't look terribly impressive as a model, but I have to say, to be fair, all the big enemies look like badly designed toys, and I think that's deliberate. So it's quite funny in a way. Now, that was to show you how easy it is to die, because you can't always move very fast, especially not when you pick up something. Here I'm doing a bit better, but you see I have to move about to trigger the control for Y button to get hold of something. It doesn't always trigger as it should. So, you know, once again, the controls can trip you up, and you can die very easily in this game. Most enemies can one-shot you and you're gone, and I was just lucky with the Yeti that, 3 hits and you were out. And there's a whole sequence of Yeti encounters, and it really got to me in the end. Here's another great one, the icicle that will kill you because your special abilities doesn't cool down fast enough that you can move out of the way. Here I managed to spawn an ice ball, but when I go forward, they're slippery. I fall to my death. So here we have a scene where the 2 teams I'd mentioned before who run top and bottom line, Osaka and Kyoto, they split up into those directions. They're coming together at one point, and I had to backtrack to get there, because you have to do not just the top line but the bottom line, or vice versa. You have to do both routes. So once you backtrack to a point where it converges, they all tell you what they've been doing and what special abilities they've got and what enemies they encountered, and you know all that. So it's a bit weird. I was reminded of good visual novels where if you need to backtrack, the writing takes into account, and the programming does it, that you've been to a particular place and that you've done a particular task, so it won't repeat that information to you. But here you're constantly reminded of things that you have in fact already seen or done. So I hope that wasn't too confusing, but I'll demonstrate it later on with the timeline again. And this is part of the issue with having a structure where you've got an end point which is the true ending, but we know that only came 6 months later. So I'm now showing you going backwards, unraveling, so to speak, the timeline. There's quite a sequence, and here the red block saying end, this is the cliffhanger ending they had on Apple Arcade originally. And once you reach that and you have not completed all the previous routes, it tells you you have to go back and complete everything. Otherwise, you are not allowed to go through to the final boss and achieve the true ending, because you need all special abilities from all the kids to be able to defeat all the bosses in the lead up to the final boss. So here you see the timeline again, top and bottom, and how it sometimes converges into one in the middle. So you can skip around, and in fact if you want to play the game, I would very much recommend that you don't go through as I did in one go just on one timeline, but that you complete one segment and then go back and do the other route. The true ending. Is it a good one? Does it work? Here's a scene from the beginning showing Aniki very much in his selfish man alone mode. And this is towards the ending. After all the kids have gone through the process of discovering their abilities, overcoming problems, bonding with each other, and knowing that they can only succeed if they all stick together, obviously.
はあ、臆病者の亡者。僕はもう。その一。ねえ、だけどなんかおかしくない？
In a way, I found the interim cliffhanger ending, the original one, more satisfying than the true ending. The cliffhanger ending has quite a big revelation attached to it, one that is a surprise, I would think, for most people. While it is a bit of a deus ex machina type of revelation, I found it a good one because once I'd heard it, I thought, oh yeah, well, I should have seen that. Yes, a lot of things make sense now. I think that's good storytelling. You knew it was a cliffhanger and the final stage was still to come. So after that, a lot of things obviously changed, including the dynamics in the group. And going towards the final boss felt a bit like a chore. It was a bit of a slog, I'd have to say. There was nothing terribly new there. All the other revelations that followed and were often given in what I would call text dumps, static scenes, so to speak, a lot of that you'd sort of figured out yourself as you went along, and who the final boss would be was pretty clear. So there wasn't such big excitement there anymore. You know, something so big, you just had to know it. It would change everything. No, it wasn't like that. It was basically wrapping up everything. So you had another maybe 2 or 3 hours at the most, where you trundled along defeating one mid-boss after the other, until you finally came up against the big one right at the end. So funnily enough, the promise of the true ending hasn't delivered the same kind of excitement as the previous one, the cliffhanger one. I guess it was always difficult following up on the cliffhanger to provide a really big finale. I just thought the writing right at the end lacked that bit of verve that vitalizes a story. So I was glad to finish it and to know how everything fitted together, but it was really just putting the final puzzle pieces together. That's my thoughts really on the cliffhanger ending and the true ending. It would have been, I am sure, so much better if they had written it all in one piece, thought through how they were going to pace it and fitted the structure accordingly. And I know many people have also voiced the opinion that the game might have been better suited to being more of a visual novel, with maybe a few light puzzles and some decision making along the way, but take out most of the rather tedious gameplay. It might have fared a lot better, and then they would have focused even more on the story, I think, and delivered an even better story. But, I'm not the writer. That's just how I felt about it. I'll take this opportunity to give you my final thoughts on World's End Club. What I liked about it was the sense of friendship and camaraderie between the children and how it develops. That is nicely done, although I think it will appeal more to a younger audience. At times the jokes and the ongoing fighting and arguments between them got a bit much for me. The animation is beautiful, and the music, I think, really grows on you. It doesn't have any huge standout tunes or songs, but it just enhances the gameplay and the story really, really well. And there are some little earworms in there, so I really like the music. The composer is Jun Fukuda. With the graphics, please bear in mind that I think it looks a lot better in handheld mode. Docked on a big TV screen, I didn't think it looked that brilliant. It looked a bit rough around the edges, so handheld, I would say, is the way to go. It looks really nice. The story is okay. It's nothing groundbreaking, nothing I haven't seen before, especially from that writing team. But it's perfectly all right. I like the story. I like that type of story anyway, apocalyptic, end of world kind of thing. I was certainly intrigued enough that I wanted to go through to the end to find out what happened, but I don't think it will go down in history as one of the finer works from these particular authors. And I've already shown you what I think are the weaknesses and the faults of the game, and they're mainly to do with the gameplay, the controls, the often repetitive nature of it. For more experienced gamers, it's probably a bit on the light side. The final boss fight, it was not my favourite moment of the game. It was quite long drawn out. It wasn't really hugely impressive, and they committed, in my book, the cardinal sin of requiring continual one button mashing to achieve the end result, so much so that my hand really hurt terribly from it. I only just hung in there to be able to finish. So anybody with the slightest issue of RSI, carpal tunnel, arthritis, anything like that is probably going to struggle a bit and find it uncomfortable. Really should not happen in this day and age when accessibility is such a big issue, I think. I hope you found my overview of the game helpful in case you are still wondering about making a decision, especially now that it is available on PC. Don't hesitate to post any questions if you have them. Thank you very much for watching. As always, please keep well. I'm Food for Dogs. Bye-bye.
安心して。ポチさん、本当にハイパーウルトラめちゃんこぽえぽえ、ありがとうございました。
頑張れグミ言われるけど、みんな一つになれば天下無敵だ。日にあげたらさあ出かけよう。喧嘩したりもするけれど、パッと笑えば友達。この世界が終わっても頑張れ組は一緒だよ。夏の風に帆を上げて冒険の旅さ出発。